The message arrived at Earth's diplomatic headquarters on a cold Tuesday morning in March, and nobody expected it to change everything. Admiral Jacob Price stood in the communications room with his coffee getting cold in his hand while watching the holographic display flicker to life with symbols that looked like nothing he had ever seen before. The translation matrix was working overtime and struggling to make sense of the alien language that was streaming through their systems. After 3 centuries of isolation following humanity's discovery of faster-than-light travel, the Galactic Council was finally reaching out to make contact with Earth. Talon Torres walked into the room and stopped beside Jacob with her tablet in hand and her eyes going wide when she saw the message being decoded on the screens. She was Earth's chief diplomat and had been preparing for this moment for years. But now that it was actually happening, she felt completely unprepared. The symbols kept changing and rearranging themselves as the computer tried to find patterns that matched any known language structure. It took almost an hour before the message finally became readable in English. "They want a peace summit," Helen said quietly, while reading through the decoded text. "They are calling it a harmonization conference, and apparently our expansion into the outer rim has made them nervous." Jacob put down his coffee cup and moved closer to the screen. Humanity had been careful during their expansion, or at least they thought they had been careful. They avoided conflict wherever possible and established colonies only on uninhabited worlds and kept to themselves as much as they could. But the galaxy had been watching them the entire time, and now the Watchers wanted to talk. When and where? Jacob asked while scrolling through the message. Helen pointed to a section near the bottom of the text. "Station Zareth 9 in neutral territory in the Andromeda sector, and they want to meet in 3 weeks from now. They are requesting a delegation of no more than 5 humans." She paused and glanced at the final line of the message with a frown forming on her face. "They specifically ask that we come unarmed and in a vessel of minimal defensive capability." Jacob raised an eyebrow at that request. "They think we are going to start a war at a peace conference?" he asked. Helen shrugged and looked back at the message. "They don't know us yet, and from what our scouts have reported, the other species in the council are very different from us. Different in ways that go beyond just physical appearance or cultural practices. They seem to approach everything from a completely different perspective than humans do." The news spread through Earth's government within minutes, and by noon every major leader was in a virtual conference call debating what to do. Some wanted to send a military escort despite the request to come unarmed. Others wanted to decline the invitation entirely and maintain Earth's isolation. But most agreed that this was an opportunity that humanity could not afford to miss. The galaxy was much larger than Earth, and humanity needed allies. They wanted to survive and thrive among the stars. The decision was made by evening. Jacob would lead the delegation because of his military experience and diplomatic training. Helen would accompany him as the primary negotiator and cultural expert. They would also bring Greg Murphy, who was Earth's chief scientist and knew more about alien biology and technology than anyone else on the planet. Lisa Chang would join them as security advisor, even though they were asked to come. Unarmed because someone needed to assess potential threats. The final member of the delegation would be Peter Brooks, who specialized in cultural liaison work and had studied every piece of alien communication that Earth had ever intercepted. Choosing the ship took longer than choosing the people. Earth's fleet consisted mostly of exploration vessels and colony ships with only a handful of dedicated military craft. The diplomatic shuttle Meridian was selected because it was small and sleek and designed specifically for making good impressions rather than for combat. It had comfortable quarters for the crew and a conference room for meetings and enough supplies to last for months if necessary. What it did not have was heavy weapons or thick armor plating or any of the features that made military vessels so intimidating. Jacob expected the Meridian personally before approving it for the mission. He walked through every corridor and checked every system and made sure that nothing would malfunction during the journey. The ship was only 5 years old and had been used for diplomatic missions to human colonies in nearby star systems. It had never traveled as far as the Andromeda sector and had never carried a delegation as important as this one would be. The crew spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the journey. Helen studied everything she could find about the Galactic Council and the species that belonged to it. There was not much information available because Earth had maintained its isolation so carefully. Most of what they knew came from long-range observations and intercepted communications. The Council seemed to include dozens of different species from across multiple galaxies, and they had been working together for thousands of years. Greg prepared scientific equipment for analyzing alien environments and biology. He packed scanners and sample collectors and medical supplies that might be needed if anyone got sick or injured. He also brought translation devices and recording equipment so they could document everything that happened during the conference. Lisa focused on security protocols and emergency procedures. Even though they were going to a peace conference, she wanted to make sure the delegation could evacuate quickly if something went wrong. Peter worked on preparing cultural materials to share with the Council. He collected examples of human art and music and literature that showed the best of what humanity had to offer. He also prepared presentations about Earth's history and values and hopes for the future. He wanted the aliens to see humans as more than just another species expanding through space. He wanted them to see humanity as potential friends and partners. The day of departure arrived with gray clouds hanging over the launch facility. Jacob stood at the base of the meridian with the rest of the delegation and looked up at the ship that would carry them into the unknown. Helen stood beside him with her datapad clutched against her chest. Greg was already running final checks on his equipment. Lisa was scanning the perimeter out of habit, even though they were in one of the most secure facilities on Earth. Peter was unusually quiet and seemed lost in thought. Earth's leadership came to see them off. The president gave a short speech about the importance of the mission and the hopes that all of humanity held for peaceful relations with the galactic community. Jacob listened politely, but his mind was already focused on the journey ahead and the challenges that waited for them at Station Zareth 9. He knew that first impressions would be crucial and that everything the delegation said and did would be analyzed and judged by species they had never met. Before they boarded the Meridian and settled into their stations, Jacob took the captain's chair while Helen sat beside him at the navigation console. Greg disappeared into the science lab to organize his equipment one last time. Lisa checked the security systems even though they had minimal defensive capabilities. Peter went to his quarters to review his cultural materials again. The launch sequence began and the ship lifted off from Earth with a low rumble that rattled through the hull. The journey to Station Zareth 9 would take 18 days through the fold space lanes that connected different parts of the galaxy. Jacob had made dozens of faster-than-light jumps before, but never one this far from home. The meridian slipped into fold space smoothly, and the stars outside the windows stretched into long streams of light before disappearing entirely. They were committed now, and there was no turning back. The 18 days in, fold space passed slowly for the human delegation aboard the meridian, and each day brought them closer to a meeting that could change humanity's future forever. Jacob spent most of his time reviewing the limited information they had about the Galactic Council while Helen practiced diplomatic greetings in several alien languages that the translation matrix had managed to decode. Greg ran simulations of possible alien biologies and prepared his medical equipment for any situation they might encounter. Lisa checked and rechecked the ship's systems, looking for anything that might malfunction at a critical moment. Peter meditated in his quarters and tried to calm his nerves about meeting beings from completely different worlds. When the Meridian finally dropped out of fold space near Station Zareth 9, the entire crew gathered on the bridge to see what awaited them. The station appeared on their view screens, and everyone fell silent at the sight. It was enormous and beautiful in ways that human architecture had never achieved. The structure was all sweeping curves and spiraling arms that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. Bioluminescent panels covered the surface and pulsed with soft blue and green light that looked almost alive. There were no sharp edges or straight lines anywhere on the entire station. Greg leaned forward in his seat and stared at the scanner readings with his mouth hanging open. "The whole thing is organic," he said quietly. "It's not built from metal or plastic or any material we use. It's grown like a plant or a coral reef. The station is actually alive." Helen moved closer to the view screen and watched the lights pulse across the station's surface in patterns that almost seemed deliberate. How is that even possible? She asked. Greg shook his head and kept staring at his scanner. I have no idea, but I'm going to find out. As they approached the docking bay, Jacob noticed the other ships that were already moored to the station. Each vessel was completely unique and unlike anything humanity had ever built. One ship looked like a massive crystalline flower with petals that seemed to refract light in impossible ways. Another resembled a school of metal fish that somehow held together in a perfect formation without any visible connections. A third ship appeared to be nothing more than a soap bubble that shimmered with rainbow colors but somehow maintained its shape in the vacuum of space. Peter looked at each ship carefully and tried to imagine what kind of beings would build such vessels. Our ship looks like a brick compared to these, he said finally. Jacob glanced at the Meridian's reflection in a nearby panel and had to agree. The human ship was all straight lines and flat surfaces and practical design. It looked crude and primitive next to the elegant alien vessels. Function over form, Jacob replied. Let's hope they appreciate practicality more than beauty. The docking process was surprisingly smooth in the stations. Systems seemed perfectly capable of handling a human vessel despite the obvious differences in design philosophy. Within minutes, the Meridian was securely attached to the station, and the airlock was pressurizing to match the station's internal atmosphere. The delegation gathered near the airlock door and made final adjustments to their appearance. Jacob had chosen their attire very carefully. Dark suits with Earth's diplomatic insignia embroidered on the chest, but nothing that looked military or threatening. No visible weapons, and no armor, and nothing that could be interpreted as hostile. Helen straightened her jacket and took a deep breath. Remember to smile, but not too much, because baring teeth might be seen as aggressive by some species. Keep your hands visible at all times. Move slowly and deliberately. Don't make any sudden gestures. The guidelines went on, and everyone had memorized them, but hearing them again helped calm the nerves. Lisa adjusted her tablet that contained all their security protocols and emergency procedures. Peter checked his translation device one more time, even though he had already checked it a dozen times that morning. The airlock doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the delegation stepped into a corridor that was unlike anything they had expected. The walls were smooth and curved and seemed to glow with their own internal light. The floor was soft under their feet and felt almost like walking on moss or thick carpet. The air smelled strange but not unpleasant, like flowers mixed with something metallic. And the corridor was filled with beings that looked like they had stepped out of humanity's wildest dreams. A creature that resembled a floating jellyfish drifted past them with long tendrils trailing behind it. Its body pulsed with soft purple light, and its surface was translucent enough that they could see strange organs moving inside. An insectoid being with 6 legs and 4 arms walked along the wall as easily as walking on the floor. Its chitinous body was covered in intricate patterns, and its large compound eyes reflected the corridor lights like mirrors. A group of beings that looked like mobile plants swayed as they moved with leaves rustling despite there being no wind in the corridor. Their roots dragged along the floor and left faint trails of moisture behind them. The human delegation stood frozen for a moment, just taking in the incredible diversity of life that surrounded them. Then they noticed something disturbing. Every single alien in the corridor had stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at the humans. The jellyfish creature's purple glow darkened to a deep, troubled crimson. The insectoid being froze in mid-step, with its antennae pressed flat against its head. The plant beings recoiled, and their roots scraped against the floor as they backed away from the humans. "Did we do something wrong?" Lisa whispered, without moving her lips much. Helen watched the aliens carefully and noticed exactly where they were all looking. "They are staring at our faces," she said quietly. "Specifically at our eyes." Jacob realized what she meant immediately. Humans had forward-facing eyes because humanity's ancient ancestors had been hunters, who needed to judge distances accurately. Forward-facing eyes were the mark of a predator. Every human in the delegation had predator eyes. Helen looked more carefully at the aliens around them and noticed something she should have realized earlier. The jellyfish creature had eyes spaced around its entire body for seeing in all directions at once. The insectoid had compound eyes on the sides of its head for a maximum field of vision. The plant beings had light-sensitive organs scattered across their surfaces. Every single species they could see had the eyes of prey animals. "Oh no," Helen breathed. "They are all prey species." The corridor remained silent as the two groups stared at each other across an evolutionary divide that neither had anticipated. Jacob realized that they needed to do something to break the tension before it got worse. He slowly raised his hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace and greeting. Several aliens flinched backward at the movement. A security officer that looked like a large crab, covered in blue armor, stepped forward and placed itself between the humans and the other aliens. Its translator crackled to life with a harsh electronic voice. "You are the human delegation," the security officer said. It was not a question. Jacob nodded slowly and carefully. "We are honored to be here and grateful for the Council's invitation." The security officer's eye stalk swiveled to examine each human individually. "You will follow me to the conference chamber. Do not deviate from the designated path. Do not approach other delegates without permission. Do not make sudden movements." The list of rules was clearly meant to protect the other aliens from the humans, and that realization stung more than Jacob wanted to admit. They followed the security officer through a maze of corridors that all looked similar with their glowing walls and soft floors. Other aliens pressed themselves against the walls as the humans passed or ducked into side passages to avoid getting close. Peter kept his eyes forward and tried not to show how much the reactions hurt. He had spent years studying alien cultures and preparing for peaceful contact, and now they were being treated like dangerous animals. Greg pulled out his scanner and tried to take subtle readings of the aliens they passed. His device beeped softly, and several nearby aliens jumped at the sound. The security officer spun around with its claws raised defensively. "What is that device?" it demanded. Greg held it up slowly so everyone could see it. "Just a scientific scanner for recording information. It's completely harmless." The security officer stared at the device for a long moment before turning back around. "Keep it silent," it ordered. The conference chamber finally came into view through a large archway ahead. The security officer stopped at the entrance and gestured for the humans to enter. "Your seats are marked with your planet's designation. Do not leave your assigned area during the conference. Do not speak unless recognized by a council speaker. Do not approach the central platform under any circumstances." Jacob thanked the security officer as politely as he could, but received no response except a wary look from those swiveling eye stalks. The delegation entered the conference chamber and stopped to take in the enormous space. The room was designed to accommodate hundreds of different physiologies and life support requirements. Some delegates floated in specialized atmosphere bubbles that hung in the air. Others rested in pools of various colored liquids that bubbled and steamed. Several species simply hovered using methods that defied obvious explanation. At the center of the room was a raised platform where the council speakers would presumably address the assembly. Helen spotted their assigned section, marked with a symbol that resembled Earth's continents. It was positioned near the back of the chamber, away from most of the other delegates. They made their way to their seats and sat down carefully. The chairs were clearly designed for bipedal species, but the proportions were slightly wrong for human bodies. Lisa shifted uncomfortably and tried to find a position that did not make her knees ache as they settled in Jacob, and became increasingly aware of the silence that had fallen over the chamber. Hundreds of aliens from dozens of species, and not one of them was making a sound. They were all watching the humans with what could only be described as fear. Some aliens had changed colors to darker shades. Others had drawn back into protective shells or bubbles. A few had physically moved their seats further away from the human section. "This is bad," Peter said quietly. "This is really bad." Helen nodded without taking her eyes off the other delegates. "We need to change their perception somehow, but I don't know how. We can't change what we are." Jacob looked around the chamber at all the frightened faces and felt something heavy settle in his chest. They had come here hoping to make friends, and instead they had terrified everyone they met. The conference had not even started yet, and humanity had already failed. The conference chamber remained silent for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes while the delegates continued arriving and taking their assigned positions. Jacob watched as more species entered through various doorways designed for different body types and environmental needs. Some came through standard corridors like the humans had used. Others emerged from tubes filled with water or mist. A few simply materialized on their platforms in flashes of light that suggested teleportation technology far beyond anything Earth had developed. A being that resembled a standing otter with silver fur finally approached the human section with slow, careful steps. It stopped just outside what it clearly considered a safe distance, and its translator device crackled to life with a voice that sounded surprisingly gentle. "I am Speaker Nim of the Quellan Confederacy, and I welcome you to Station Zareth 9, though I confess your presence is unsettling to many of us here." The speaker's fur rippled in waves that traveled from its head down to its tail, and the humans had no idea what that meant. But it did not look like a happy gesture. Jacob stood slowly and made sure to keep his movements smooth and non-threatening. "We apologize if we have caused any offense or discomfort. We came here in the spirit of peace and cooperation, and we hope to learn from all of you." He extended his hand in greeting, then quickly withdrew it when Speaker Nim flinched backward with its fur standing on end. The speaker took a moment to compose itself before continuing. "Your vessel," it said carefully. "When it approached our station, our sensors detected its composition and structural integrity. The hull is military-grade titanium alloy reinforced of carbon composite layers, is it not?" Helen stepped forward and tried to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "It is a diplomatic shuttle, but yes, it is built to last. We construct most of our ships with durable materials because space can be dangerous, and we want our crews to be safe." Speaker Nim's ears flattened against its head, and its tail twitched nervously. "The hull plating measures 30 centimeters thick, with redundant structural supports throughout the frame. Your ship has radiation shielding that could withstand close proximity to a stellar corona. Your reactor output exceeds that of our largest cargo haulers. You came to a peace conference in what we would consider a heavy assault vessel." Greg spoke up before he could stop himself. "This is just a shuttle. Our actual military ships are much more robust than this." The moment the words left his mouth, he realized his mistake. Every alien within earshot turned to stare at him with what could only be described as horror. Speaker Nim's fur went completely flat against its body, and its eyes widened until the humans could see white around the edges. "Your casual transport could withstand direct bombardment from most Council fleet weapons," the speaker said quietly. "What do your warships look like?" Jacob shot Greg a warning glance, then turned back to Speaker Nim. "We are not here to discuss military capabilities. We are here to talk about peace and cooperation and finding ways to coexist in this galaxy. Please let us begin the proceedings, and hopefully understanding will grow from dialogue." Speaker Nim nodded slowly, though its fur remained flat with stress. "Yes, of course. The conference will begin shortly. Please remain in your designated area and wait for the council chairman to address the assembly." The speaker retreated to its own section on the far side of the chamber and immediately began conversing with other delegates in hushed tones. The humans could not hear what was being said, but they could see the agitated gestures and color changes that rippled through the assembled aliens. "This is going from bad to worse," Lisa whispered. Peter nodded in agreement while trying to look friendly and non-threatening, which was apparently harder than he had anticipated. A deep, resonant tone echoed through the chamber, and all conversations stopped immediately. The lights dimmed except for those illuminating the central platform where a being unlike anything the humans had yet seen was rising from below the floor. It appeared to be made of living crystal that refracted light into rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. Its body had no obvious head or limbs, but somehow conveyed a sense of age and authority that made everyone in the room pay attention. "I am Council Chairman Vex, and I welcome all delegates to this harmonization conference." The chairman's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once rather than from any specific point. "We gather today to discuss the integration of a new species into our galactic community. The humans of Earth have expanded into territories that border several council member states, and it is time we establish formal relations and mutual understanding. Let us begin with territorial concerns and resource allocation. A delegate from the back of the chamber rose from its pool of bubbling liquid. The being looked like a collection of translucent sacks filled with glowing gas, and its voice whistled through its translator like wind through a narrow canyon. The Vorian Collective wishes to address the matter of human colonial expansion. In the past 50 standard years, this species has established permanent settlements on 17 worlds. Many of these planets are classified as death worlds by galactic standards. We wish to understand why humans persist in occupying such hostile environments. Jacob stood and waited for Chairman Vex to acknowledge him before speaking. Those worlds you mention are actually quite pleasant by our standards. They have moderate gravity and stable atmospheres and reasonable temperature ranges. We chose them because they reminded us of Earth, and because we believed they were unclaimed territory. The Vorian delegate's sacs pulsed with agitated colors. Pleasant, it repeated. The world you designate as New Boston has atmospheric pressure that would crush most species in this chamber. The gravity is 15% above galactic standard. The temperature varies by 40 degrees between seasons. You call this pleasant? Helen stood beside Jacob and tried to explain. Those conditions are indeed similar to Earth. We find them comfortable because we evolved in that environment. Our bodies are adapted to handle those pressures and temperatures. An amphibious delegate in a nearby water tank spoke up with a bubbling voice. You endure pressure sufficient to compress internal organs, and you call it comfortable. You tolerate gravity that would fracture our skeletal structures. You survive temperature swings that would send most of us into hibernation, shock, or death. What kind of world did you evolve on, Greg? Could not help but answer this question. Earth is a fairly typical terrestrial planet by our measurements. It has active plate tectonics and a magnetic field that protects against radiation and weather systems that circulate heat and moisture around the globe. It is actually a very nice place to live. The chamber erupted in agitated sounds and color changes. Chairman Vex had to sound the resonant tone 3 more times before order was restored. The council wishes to establish baseline parameters for comparison, the chairman announced. What does Galactic Standard consider a comfortable world? The delegates consulted among themselves for several minutes before Speaker Nim rose to answer. Standard galactic parameters are as follows. Gravity at 0.7 Earth standard. Stable temperature maintained at 22 degrees with minimal variation. Atmospheric pressure at 0.6 Earth standard. Low ultraviolet radiation exposure. Minimal seismic activity. No extreme weather patterns. Stable day and night cycles. These are the conditions under which most civilized species thrive. Peter could not stop himself from commenting. That sounds like a luxury resort. The moment he said it, he knew it was another mistake. Speaker Nim's fur bristled, and several other delegates made sounds of distress. In what you call normal, sounds like a prison planet designed for punishing criminals, Speaker Nim replied sharply. Your species lives voluntarily in conditions that we would consider torture. Chairman Vex interrupted before the situation could deteriorate further. Let us move on to other matters. The Council has reviewed human cultural databases as part of our preparation for this conference. We have questions about human dietary requirements and metabolic processes. A crystalline delegate that looked like a cluster of geometric shapes spoke in a voice like chimes. Your species requires how much protein intake daily? Helen consulted her tablet before answering. An average adult human needs approximately 50 to 70 grams of protein per day, along with other nutrients. The crystalline delegate's facets shifted to colors that suggested alarm. That is extraordinary. We consume 3 grams per planetary rotation. Some species here are fully photosynthetic and require no external nutrients at all. You are saying each human must consume the equivalent of their body weight in nutrients every 30 planetary rotations. Greg tried to make it sound less alarming. We have high metabolisms because we maintain constant internal body temperature regardless of external conditions. It requires significant energy to keep our bodies functioning optimally. What he did not add But what every delegate seemed to realize on their own was that such a metabolism suggested a species built for sustained activity, for endurance, for long-distance pursuit of prey, across vast distances until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. The insectoid delegate that had seen the humans in the corridor stood on its seat and waved its antennae in agitation. There are reports that human colony ships carry facilities dedicated to voluntary physical stress, equipment designed to deliberately strain muscles and cardiovascular systems. Is this accurate information? Lisa nodded slowly. Yes, we have gymnasiums and exercise facilities. We work out regularly to maintain our health and fitness. Physical activity is important to us. The insectoid's antennae quivered, and its voice came out high-pitched through the translator. You deliberately damage your muscle tissue so it repairs itself stronger than before. You voluntarily subject yourselves to cardiovascular strain as a recreational activity. You seek out physical hardship for entertainment. The delegate turned to address the entire chamber. They literally torture themselves. For fun, and call it healthy? Chairman Vex called for order. Again, as the chamber dissolved into chaos with delegates shouting questions and objections in dozens of different languages. The humans sat back down and tried to look as harmless as possible, which seemed to be impossible given how everything they said made the situation worse. This conference was supposed to be their chance to prove humanity could integrate peacefully into galactic society, but instead, they were proving to be everyone's worst. Nightmare made real. Chairman Vex managed to restore order after several minutes of chaos, and the delegates reluctantly settled back into their seats or pools or floating positions. The chairman's crystalline body pulsed with colors that seemed to indicate frustration or perhaps exhaustion. We will continue with cultural exchange inquiries, the chairman announced. The council wishes to understand human approaches to conflict resolution and social organization. How does your species handle disputes between individuals or groups? Jacob stood again and chose his words very carefully this time. We have established systems of justice, including courts and mediation processes, and democratic institutions where citizens can voice their concerns. Like any civilization, we have laws that govern behavior and consequences for those who break those laws. We believe in the rule of law and in resolving conflicts through dialogue whenever possible. He hoped that would sound reassuring to the assembled aliens, but judging from their reactions, it did. Not Speaker Nim rose from its seat, with its fur still flattened against its body in apparent stress, and when laws prove insufficient, the Quellan asked, when a threat arises that cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with, what does humanity do then? Jacob felt the weight of every eye in the chamber focused on him. Then we defend ourselves, he said simply. We protect our people and our worlds, using whatever means are necessary. But we always seek peaceful solutions first, and violence is always our last resort. The chamber fell silent. Again, but this silence felt different from before. It was heavier and more oppressive, as if the very air had become difficult to breathe. A delegate from the chorus, a hive-mind species that appeared as a swarm of small flying creatures moving in perfect synchronization, spoke in eerie harmony. We accessed your cultural databases as permitted under pre-conference protocols. Your entertainment media is deeply disturbing to us. Stories of warfare and combat and survival against overwhelming odds. Your children play games that simulate violence and conflict. Your history records thousands of years of continuous warfare between your own factions. Yet here you sit, speaking of peace and cooperation. Helen felt compelled to respond to that. Our history is indeed violent, and we do not deny that. We have made terrible mistakes and fought unnecessary wars and caused immeasurable suffering to ourselves and our world. But we learned from those experiences. That is why we are here today. We want to be part of something greater than conflict. We want to contribute to galactic civilization and learn from species who have already found better ways to coexist. Our past does not have to define our future. An elderly-looking delegate that resembled a floating brain in a protective membrane spoke in a quavering voice. Can a predator truly change its fundamental nature? You are built for hunting and fighting and enduring hardships that would kill most of us. Your bodies are weapons even without tools or technology. Your minds are wired for strategic thinking and competition, and overcoming obstacles through force. How can we trust that you will not eventually turn those abilities against us when it serves your interests? Peter stood up before anyone could stop him. His voice came out more passionate than he intended. Because we choose not to. Every single day, humans make the choice to be kind instead of cruel, to build instead of destroy, to help instead of harm. Yes, we have the capacity for violence, but we also have the capacity for incredible compassion and creativity and cooperation. Having strength does not mean we must use it to hurt others. Being capable of violence does not make us violent by nature. The floating brain delegate considered this for a long moment. Your philosophy is admirable, but how can we verify that your entire species shares these values? We have encountered predator species before in our history. Most of them chose domination over cooperation. What makes humanity different from them? Jacob took a deep breath and tried to think of an answer that would satisfy the council's concerns. Before he could speak, Chairman Vex interrupted with another question. The council has noted that human ships carry weapons, even on civilian vessels. Can you explain this practice? Greg answered this time. Space is dangerous. There are asteroids and debris and radiation hazards. Our weapons are primarily designed for clearing navigation hazards and defending against pirates or other threats. We don't arm our ships because we want to attack others, but because we want to protect ourselves, Speaker. Nim's ears perked up slightly. Pirates, the Quellan repeated. You have criminals in your society who attacked vessels in space. Jacob nodded reluctantly. Yes, unfortunately, we do. Not many, and we work hard to stop them, but they exist. Crime exists in human society just as problems exist in any large civilization. Speaker Nim exchanged glances with several other delegates. We have no concept of space piracy. The idea of attacking vessels in the void where any breach could kill everyone aboard seems unthinkably cruel. That such criminals exist among your people is deeply concerning. Lisa tried to defend humanity's position. Crime rates on human worlds are actually quite low. The vast majority of humans are law-abiding citizens who would never harm anyone. Every society has individuals who make bad choices, but that does not mean the entire species should be judged by their actions. The crystalline delegate chimed in with a question. What is your incarceration rate per 1,000 citizens? Lisa consulted her tablet and gave the number. The chamber reacted with alarm, and several delegates made distressed sounds. That rate is 50 times higher than galactic average. The crystalline delegate said, You have so much internal conflict that you must imprison large portions of your population. This suggests a species that struggles with basic social cohesion. Helen felt frustration building in her chest. We are working to improve our justice systems and reduce incarceration rates. We acknowledge that we have societal problems, but we are actively trying to solve them. Is that not what matters? That we recognize our flaws and work to address them? The Vorian delegate pulsed with agitated colors. Perhaps humanity would benefit from remaining isolated until your species achieves greater social stability. Integration into the galactic community requires a certain level of internal harmony the humans apparently have not yet reached. Jacob felt anger flash through him, but forced it down. We came here in good faith, hoping to build relationships with the galactic community. If you have already decided that we are too dangerous or too primitive to join you, then why invite us to this conference at all, Chairman? Vex's voice cut through the rising tension. The invitation was extended because several council members believed that humanity deserved the opportunity to present themselves. However, the concerns being raised are legitimate and cannot be dismissed. Your species represents an unknown variable in galactic politics. You are physically powerful in ways that most of us are not. You come from a world that would kill most of us within hours. You have a history of violence that spans your entire recorded civilization. These facts make the Council understandably cautious about allowing human expansion to continue unchecked. Peter spoke up again with desperation creeping into his voice. What do you want from us? What can we do to prove that we mean no harm? Do you want us to dismantle our ships and build new ones to your specifications? Do you want us to abandon our colonies and retreat to Earth? Do you want us to change our entire culture to match what you consider acceptable? Tell us what you want, and we will try to accommodate you within reason. Speaker Nim stood and approached the human section, slightly closer than before, though, still maintaining a careful distance. The Quellen's voice was quieter now and almost sad. We want to believe that coexistence is possible. We want to trust that you will use your considerable abilities for good rather than harm. But trust must be earned, especially when the power differential is so vast. One human could potentially kill dozens of us before being stopped. One human ship could devastate worlds that we consider heavily defended. How do we protect ourselves, while also giving you the chance to prove your peaceful intentions? The question hung in the air, unanswered because none of the humans knew how to respond. They had come to this conference thinking that peaceful intentions would be enough. They had believed that simply wanting to coexist would open doors and build bridges. But they had not anticipated the depth of fear that their very existence would provoke in species, so fundamentally different from themselves. Greg pulled up his tablet and started making notes. We could offer to share our ship construction techniques. Not weapons, but hull integrity and life support redundancy. Things that could save lives in emergencies. Helen added her own ideas. Cultural exchanges where humans live and work on alien worlds following their rules and customs. Show them we can adapt and cooperate. Peter suggested joint scientific expeditions to study phenomena that most species cannot safely approach but humans could handle. The team worked late into the night developing proposals and strategies for rebuilding the Council's trust. They knew it would not be easy, and that many aliens would remain suspicious of humanity for a long time. But they also knew that this was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward integration and acceptance. The next day, when the conference reconvened, the atmosphere was slightly different. The fear was still present, but mixed with cautious curiosity. Speaker Nim addressed the assembly and presented the perspective that had been discussed the previous evening. The council members listened with varying degrees of skepticism, but at least they were listening. Chairman Vex called for a vote on whether to establish a provisional partnership with humanity. Subject to regular review and assessment, the vote was closer than the humans had hoped, but it passed. Earth would be allowed to maintain its existing colonies and establish limited trade relations with Council worlds. Human specialists could volunteer for joint projects in extreme environments. Cultural exchanges would be arranged carefully and monitored closely. It was not full membership in the galactic community, but it was a start. Jacob stood to address the council one final time. We understand that trust takes time to build, and we are grateful for this opportunity to prove ourselves. We will work hard to show that humanity can be a valuable partner and friend to all species in this galaxy. We may look like predators, but we choose every day to be protectors and builders instead. Thank you for giving us the chance to demonstrate that choice through our actions. Years passed, and slowly humanity proved itself through countless small acts of cooperation and assistance. When a solar flare threatened a Vorian colony, it was human ships that evacuated the population through radiation that would have killed other species. When an archaeological site was discovered on a high-gravity world, it was human scientists who worked alongside alien colleagues to study it. When a medical emergency required surgery in conditions too harsh for most species, a human doctor performed the procedure and saved lives. The galaxy learned, gradually, what humanity had always known deep down, that strength is not measured by the capacity for destruction, but by the courage to protect and help others. That the fiercest appearance can hide the gentlest heart. That every species has value and brings unique gifts to the community. And that sometimes the most frightening beings are exactly the ones you want beside you when facing the impossible.